She leaned in so close I caught peppermint gum and courthouse coffee. "Today I was leaving you empty-handed," Marin whispered, smiling like she'd won a bet. Kellen Shaw stood beside her in a stiff new suit, grin locked in place. "My name was Reed Mercer. I was 36 years old. I lived in a quiet suburb south of Denver. When we got married, she grabbed my last name, Mercer, because she said it looked sharp on forms and helped in her work world. I stood outside family court with a folder in my hands, acting like I belonged there. Marin watched me like she was waiting for me to break, and Kellen watched her, like he was waiting for her approval. They both wore that smug smile, like the ending was already written, me losing the house, the savings, and whatever pride I had left. Then her lawyer, Barry Klein, rolled up loud and shiny, talking big like the hallway was his stage. "Reed Mercer," he said, projecting. "Let's keep this civilized today." Marin smirked. Barry's eyes flicked over me, hunting for a reaction. I saw exactly what they wanted. If I snapped even once, they'd call me unstable and say Marin felt unsafe. So I stayed quiet. I nodded, kept my hands still, and let them waste their energy. Quick note. Before listening, share which city or country you're watching from. And let's continue. I'd had 6 months to pack the truth into a binder. The folder in my hands was nothing. The real weight sat in my shoulder bag. Marin drifted close again and dropped her voice. "Don't bother fighting," she said. "I'm walking out with the house." Kellen gave me a slow nod, like he was part of the team. I looked past them at the security camera and the tile under our shoes, and I reminded myself why I'd been so careful. In my world, auditors didn't win by shouting. We won by showing the numbers, line by line, until the story had nowhere to hide. She still thought my calm was fear, so I let her keep believing it. The binder in my bag wasn't revenge. It was proof. And proof didn't care who smiled in court. Inside was the paper trail. My late grandma's inheritance getting siphoned, a hidden online account, a condo I never agreed to, and debt Marin tried to slide onto my name. Every page had dates and reference numbers, the kind of boring details that win cases. Marin checked her phone again like she expected applause. Kellen leaned close and whispered something, and she laughed, soft and mean. Barry kept talking, trying to pull me into an argument, but I let his words hit the air and die. A bailiff with a name tag that read Larkin Price stepped out and called our case. Marin walked toward the courtroom door like she owned it, and Kellen followed right behind her. I tightened my grip on my bag strap and followed them inside. Inside the courtroom, the air felt dry and stale, like old paper and recycled breath. I kept my face neutral as I moved to my seat, but my jaw stayed tight because I knew exactly what Marin was trying to do. Even before anyone spoke, I could feel her hunger for attention, like she needed witnesses more than she needed truth. Looking back, the pattern wasn't subtle, and it sure wasn't new. Marin never just wanted control at home, where the doors were closed and nobody could see her. She wanted an audience, because power meant more to her when it embarrassed me in front of other people. I worked as an auditor for payroll and benefits at a regional medical network, and it fit me the way a clean shirt fit a normal day. It was quiet, steady, and full of paper trails, which meant you couldn't talk your way out of mistakes. If something went wrong, the numbers told on you, and that was the kind of world I understood. Marin lived in the opposite world. She was a team lead in pharma sales, always on the road, always dressed like she was walking into a spotlight that followed her from airport to hotel bar. Early on, she'd wrap an arm around me and say, "I love that you're solid, because it makes me feel safe." And she'd say it like it was a compliment she invented. Later, solid turned into her favorite little knife. She'd say it with a smile that didn't reach her eyes, like, "Reed is solid," which is another way of saying he's not exciting. And her friends would laugh because she'd already taught them to. I'd sit there with a drink in my hand and feel my ears burn, because calling it a joke gave her permission to keep doing it. At dinners, she'd throw out lines like she was doing stand-up. "He acts like buying name-brand groceries is a felony," she'd say, then tilt her head at me like I was supposed to play along. If I tried to correct one detail, even something small, she'd wave a hand and say, "See, he needs to be right about everything." Like accuracy was a personality flaw and not just reality. I wasn't counting pennies to punish her, and I wasn't trying to be anyone's boss. My grandma Evelyn raised me on safety first, and that meant bills paid on time, dues handled, and no pretending we had money we didn't have. Maren hated budgeting because budgeting made her choices visible, so she started pushing a story that I managed the money too tightly, and she said it with this innocent tone that made me sound like the villain. Over time, her control got colder and quieter. She started sleeping on the far edge of the bed like my body was something she needed distance from, and she guarded her phone like it was a second heartbeat. By then, I'd learned one hard rule about Maren. When she got quiet, she was planning, and arguing only gave her more material to twist. Sitting there in that courtroom, I pulled a pen from my bag and wrote one clean line at the top of my notes. Prove it. Don't plead it. I stared at the words I'd just written. Prove it. Don't plead it. And my hand went still. The courtroom noise faded under the buzz in my ears, and the first moment that rule saved me came back sharp. It started on a rainy Wednesday in late March, the kind of cold rain that made the whole neighborhood smell like wet pavement and exhaust. Maren pushed through the front door with her carry-on bumping the trim and her heels clicking like she was mad at the floor. She didn't kiss me, didn't even look up from her phone, and she said, "I just got back from a 2-day push in Dallas, so please do not start anything." Her voice had that tired, irritated edge, like I owed her gratitude for sending a text at all. She tossed her coat over the dining chair like the house was some hotel she'd checked into by mistake, then walked straight to the bathroom. The shower came on hard, and steam started crawling out under the door while I stood there listening to water pound tile. I grabbed her coat to hang it up because that was always my lane, handling the small stuff before it turned into a bigger mess. When my fingers hit the inner pocket, I felt paper, soaked and stiff, stuck to the lining. I figured it was a parking stub or a baggage claim tag, something boring that could wait. I pinched it out anyway, and the ink bled across my thumb as I unfolded it over the kitchen light. It was a receipt from Hartwell Jewelers downtown, printed in clean black letters, the kind of place with a suited guard by the door and a lock on the air. My throat tightened as my eyes dropped to the total. $7,860. Under that, the item line said, "Diamond tennis bracelet." And I knew, in my bones, that wasn't a gift for me, or for any friend she'd ever mentioned. The timestamp hit harder than the price. It read 1:12 in the afternoon, the same day she told me she'd been in Dallas meetings all day. And the receipt still had that fresh, wet smell like it had just survived the storm. I didn't confront her, and I didn't even let my breathing change because that was how you gave Maren ammunition. I folded the paper tight and slid it into my wallet like it belonged there. At dinner, she acted like nothing had happened, picking at her salad and scrolling her phone between bites. She launched into her story without me asking, smiling at the parts she wanted me to believe. The Dallas client was a mess, she said. Their director kept pushing for discounts like I was running a flea market, and I had to straighten him out. I nodded and kept chewing, watching her look me straight in the face while she lied like it took zero effort. After dinner, she brushed past me, took her phone with her like it was a passport, and went to bed without a good night. I cleaned the plates, turned off the lights, and sat alone at the kitchen table with the rain tapping the window over the sink. That receipt felt hot in my wallet, but I didn't pull it out again yet. Because I didn't need drama, I needed facts. I opened my laptop, logged into our accounts, and started checking what could be checked. The blue light from my laptop washed over the kitchen while the rest of the house sat dark and quiet. I pulled up our joint accounts first because that was the cleanest place to start, and I forced myself to move slow. If I rushed, I'd miss something, and Maren lived off people missing things. I checked the card activity and the account history like I did every week, scrolling line by line instead of hunting for one big smoking gun. At first it looked normal, the usual groceries and gas and the stuff that kept a house running. Then the cash pulls showed up, small enough to hide inside routine, like she'd been testing how much she could take without me noticing. A few days later in the log, the pulls got bigger, and the descriptions got cute. Transfers labeled like harmless work notes, little phrases that sounded like business but didn't match any trip, any reimbursement, any story she'd ever told me at the dinner table. I opened a blank document and started a list with dates and amounts, because my brain wanted to explode and a list gave it walls. Then I logged into the inheritance investment account, and that made my stomach tighten. I only checked it once a quarter because it was supposed to sit there untouched, and because I trusted my wife like a fool. The activity page loaded, and right away I saw movement that didn't belong, like fingerprints on clean glass. There were withdrawals and transfers I didn't recognize, and several payments going to an online bank I'd never heard her mention. The name sat there in plain text like it had always been part of our life, and it hadn't. I copied it into my list, highlighted it, and kept going even though my hands started feeling cold. From the bedroom, Marin's voice floated out, lazy and annoyed. "Are you coming to bed, or are you doing one of your spreadsheets again?" She said it like my work was some weird hobby I did to ruin her mood. "In a minute," I called back, keeping my voice flat. I didn't ask her anything because questions were how she pulled you into a fight, and fights were how she rewrote the story. When I hit the end of the account logs, I pushed my chair back and opened social media, because receipts and transfers didn't show faces. I typed a few keywords that matched notes I'd seen, and I followed the trail like I did at work, clicking through profiles the way you'd click through folders. Kellen Shaw's page popped up fast, public and polished, full of gym selfies and luxury captions about living large, like the universe had personally sponsored his lifestyle. I scrolled until my eyes stopped on a hotel lounge photo, the kind with soft lighting and overpriced drinks. A woman's wrist was in the corner of the shot, angled like an accident, but it didn't feel accidental to me. On it was a bracelet that looked exactly like the one on that receipt in my wallet. I didn't assume, and I didn't let anger do math for me. I zoomed in, compared the clasp shape, the spacing of the stones, and the way the light hit the same pattern of shine. It matched close enough that my pulse started thumping in my throat. I took screenshots, saved them into a folder on my desktop, and copied the link address into my document with the date and time. Because I wasn't building a rumor, I was building a file. Then I checked our mail history and the email rules, because money moves usually leave other trails. I found a missing mortgage notice that should have been in my inbox, and I found an alert email that had been auto-forwarded to a digital mailbox service I didn't set up. I logged into our lender portal and saw it had been switched to paperless under an email alias I didn't recognize, like someone had quietly turned off the alarms. Over the next few days, whenever I ran into something I couldn't prove, where a photo was taken, who was in a room, what a label really meant, I marked it as unknown and kept moving. By the end of that week, I had enough to know this wasn't just an affair. It was spending, planning, and hiding, and I printed my list, punched holes in the pages, and slid them into a fresh folder. I set the fresh folder on the table and stared at it like it might bite me, because now it wasn't a maybe. It was a thing with weight, and it had my name on it. The rain had eased off outside, but my chest still felt tight, like I'd been holding my breath for days and only noticed when the air ran out. My grandma Evelyn died a few years earlier and left me $64,000. Money she called a wall between you and panic. I could still hear her saying it with that no-nonsense tone, like fear was something you planned around, not something you begged to spare you. I'd kept that inheritance in a separate investment account and told Marin it was our emergency backstop, not a shopping fund, because I thought grown adults could respect a boundary. Years earlier, during a refinance, I'd added Marin as an emergency authorized user, the way you do when you're trying to be responsible and not paranoid. I told myself it was just paperwork, just in case something happened to me and she needed access, and I didn't want her trapped. That one responsible husband move turned into a live wire sitting in her purse, and I didn't even see the spark. The next afternoon, I logged into the inheritance account again, and the screen loaded slow like it was bracing me. The balance was basically wiped. One big withdrawal I never authorized, and it hit so hard I had to put my hand flat on the table to steady myself. The transaction line pointed to a title company, plain as day, and my stomach went cold in a way I still remembered like a bruise. Marin walked through the kitchen while I sat there, hair damp from another shower, phone in her hand like it was glued there. She glanced at my laptop and said, "If you're about to lecture me about money again, you can save it because I'm exhausted." I kept my eyes on the screen and said, "I'm not lecturing you about anything, I'm just working through some numbers." She snorted like that was proof I was the problem, then walked off, and I waited until her footsteps faded before I moved again. I pulled county property records the way I would at work, one search at a time, no drama and no guessing. That's when I found it, a condo purchase at 11 Waverly Lofts, Unit 4B, titled through a brand new LLC that didn't exist on any paperwork I'd ever signed. The LLC address traced back to a mailbox service, one of those places that looks like a normal suite number until you realize it's just slots and keys. The payment trail matched the same hidden online account I'd already listed, like everything ugly was starting to line up in one straight row. Then the debt started showing its teeth. I ran my credit report and saw a couple cards I didn't recognize, plus a personal loan inquiry that hit my file like a slap across the face. My heart hammered, not because I was scared, but because I knew what she was doing, and I hated how calm she acted while she did it. I grabbed my phone, stepped into the garage so she couldn't hear me, and told the automated system, "I need to freeze my credit immediately because I'm seeing unauthorized activity." When the rep came on, I repeated it in a steady voice, and I didn't ask permission to protect myself. That night, I moved my direct deposit to a new account at a credit union across town, because I was done letting my paycheck sit where she could reach it. I started cataloging assets like a man preparing for a fire, listing our car titles, retirement balances, and even serial numbers on a few high-ticket items, because I had a bad feeling she'd forget things under oath. Every time I found something, I wrote it down, dated it, and saved a copy. And I didn't let myself get distracted by the rage burning behind my ribs. The secondary punch landed when I checked our mortgage status and saw late fees stacking up like somebody had been kicking the can down the road on purpose. Autopay had been shut off, the payment confirmations were no longer hitting my inbox, and someone had been skipping payments while telling me everything was fine. When I asked Maren about it over dinner, keeping my voice even, she didn't even blink. "You worry too much," she said, chewing like she had all the time in the world. "And you always assume I'm doing something wrong." I didn't yell and I didn't confront, because yelling would have been a gift to her. I printed the statements, the property record, the credit report summary, and the mortgage history. Then I spread them across the table and built a timeline, line by line. When the pages were in order, I punched holes in the stack and locked them into the folder with a hard snap of the rings. The rings snapped shut, and that sound became my new normal. After that, for about a month, I lived like I was undercover in my own house, running the same routines with a calm face while everything under the surface stayed on fire. I still made coffee, still took out trash, still asked how her day was, because the safest place to hide a plan was inside a boring day. Maren kept pushing the same line like she was practicing for a judge. She'd drop it into conversations out of nowhere, even when nobody asked. "Reed likes to control money," she'd say, loud enough for the room, then look at me like I was supposed to apologize for paying bills on time. If I stayed quiet, she acted like my silence proved her point, and if I spoke, she acted like I was attacking her. At work, the hit came clean and ugly. I opened an email from HR with the subject line, "Anonymous Concern," and my stomach tightened before I even finished the first sentence. It said someone claimed I was mishandling payroll access, like I was slipping hands into the system and moving things around. That was the moment I realized this wasn't only about divorce money. She was aiming for my paycheck, because if I lost my job, I'd be desperate enough to sign anything. I didn't sit there stewing, and I didn't try to charm my way out of it. I walked straight to my manager, Denise Halverson, and said, "I need to report this immediately and ask for an internal review, because the claim is false, and I can prove it." Denise blinked hard, then nodded like she appreciated someone showing up with facts instead of panic. I pulled my access logs, my ticket history, and the approvals chain, and I handed her a clean audit trail before the rumor could crawl through the office. A couple days later, HR asked me questions in a small conference room with the door closed, and I answered like I was reading from a manual. "My access is role-based, every change is logged, and I have no reason to hide anything," I said, keeping my voice even. They asked who might have made the complaint, and I didn't speculate because guessing helps liars. I just told them, "Whoever sent it wants a story, not the truth, so please follow the trail and not the noise." Later, through discovery messages and one coworker's statement, I learned Maren had been planting seeds. She'd been hinting to people that I knew how to move money, like I was the thief and she was the victim stuck with me. It fit her pattern perfectly. Take what she did, flip it, and sell it with confidence. When I heard that, I didn't call her out because I wasn't collecting apologies. I was collecting evidence. At home, she turned the baiting up, and she did it when her friends were around, because she loved witnesses. One night, two of her coworkers were in our living room with wine glasses, and Maren pointed at me with a smile. "Tell them how you track every dollar, Reed," she said. "It's like living with a bank security guard." I kept my tone polite and short and said, "I track bills because late fees are pointless and that's all there is to it." Maren laughed too loud and said, "See, that attitude is exactly what I mean." And I picked up the empty glasses and carried them to the sink. Right after each little setup, I wrote it down with the date and who was there. because memory gets fuzzy and paper doesn't. I set up a safe deposit box for the originals because I stopped trusting anything left in our house, and I started communicating in writing whenever I could. If she tried to corner me, I'd say, "Send that to me in a text so I don't misunderstand you." And she'd roll her eyes like I was being dramatic. The next morning, I drove to the credit union, slid my envelope of originals across the counter, and turned the key in the safe deposit box until the lock clicked. With that click in the safe deposit box, something in me settled into a colder kind of focus. I walked out of the credit union, got in my car, and didn't even turn the radio on, because I needed my head clear. I wasn't looking for a billboard lawyer who'd posture for cameras, and I wasn't paying for someone to pound a desk while my life burned. I hired Nolan Whitlock, a 62-year-old attorney who looked like he belonged in a quiet library. His office smelled like paper and lemon cleaner, and everything in it was neat without trying too hard. When he shook my hand, he didn't do that power grip thing, and he didn't ask for a dramatic speech, which told me he'd seen men like me before and didn't need the show. I sat across from him and slid my binder onto his desk, the thick one with my timeline, printouts, and notes. Nolan opened it and started flipping pages slow, like he was reading a manual that someone had tried to sabotage. He didn't say a word for a long time, and the silence felt heavier than any argument Marin ever picked. Finally, he looked up, eyes steady, and said, "You've already done the hard part, because you kept your head." Then he tapped it once with one finger and added, "Now we let her collapse under her own paperwork." I didn't smile because it wasn't funny, but I felt that hard relief you get when someone competent confirms you're not crazy. His plan was simple, and that was the point. We filed clean, stayed vague, and didn't reveal the condo or the hidden account too early, even though every part of me wanted to throw it in Marin's face. Nolan said, "Confidence makes people sloppy, and sloppy is where truth leaks out." And he meant Marin and her lawyer. We let Marin get comfortable, we let Barry Klein swagger, and we let them submit a financial disclosure that accidentally left out the biggest pieces. Nolan also warned me about a trick he'd seen too many times. He leaned back and said, "When they feel the ground shifting, they claim intimidation or an unsafe home environment. And suddenly you're negotiating with a threat hanging over you." So we prepped like I was preparing for an audit, not a breakup. I pulled doorbell camera logs, kept a calm text record, and avoided any in-person confrontation without a witness, even when Marin tried to corner me into one. When the papers were ready, Nolan didn't hype it up. He just said, "We serve her, and then you stay boring because boring wins." And he meant it. Marin got served a couple days later, and I was there when it happened, standing back like I was watching the next phase settle in. She read the first page, her face tightened, and she snapped, "You are not seriously doing this to me, Reed, because this is pathetic." I didn't raise my voice, and I didn't argue the way she wanted. I said, "You can tell your lawyer whatever story you want, but the court gets documents, not your moods." She stared at me like she was measuring whether she could bully me into backing down. Then the insulted look slid right off her face. About 10 minutes later, she shifted into smug, like she was already celebrating, and she said, "Good luck trying to take anything from me because you're going to lose." She moved into the condo fast, which told me she felt safe there, and Nolan liked that more than he liked any speech. It tied her directly to the property without us having to chase her for months, and it made her choices look deliberate instead of accidental. Before I left Nolan's office that week, he slid it back to me and said, "The goal isn't to win loudly, Reed. It's to win clean, with her own signature on the lie." I walked out to my car, pulled my phone out, and sent Nolan the latest doorbell log file in an email with the subject line, "Updated records," then hit send. After I hit send, I kept my phone in my hand a second longer, like Marin might magically pop out of the screen and snatch it. The next phase started fast, and it didn't feel like a breakup anymore. It felt like a slow grind where one side tried to sell a story, and the other side had to nail facts to the wall. During discovery, Marin's side pushed the "Reed is controlling" line like it was their whole personality. They didn't bring proof, just attitude and repetition, like saying something enough times made it real. I read their requests and could practically hear Marin's voice in the phrasing, that smug little tilt she got when she thought she'd cornered me. Barry tried to rattle me in a settlement meeting in a beige conference room that smelled like burnt coffee. He talked over everyone, cutting off Nolan, cutting off me, acting like volume equaled truth. "My client has lived under financial intimidation for years," he said, leaning forward with his shiny grin. And your client's records obsession is part of the abuse. I didn't move because I knew he wanted me to flinch and look guilty. Nolan didn't bite, not even a little. He slid a legal pad toward Barry and said, "If you have evidence, produce it. And if you do not have evidence, stop performing." Then he started listing what he wanted like he was ordering parts. Documents, requests, logs, and third-party records. Barry tried to interrupt, and Nolan kept going anyway, calm as a metronome, because you can't argue with receipts when the court orders them. I wasn't present for most of Marin's meetups with Kellen, and I didn't pretend I was. The records were, though, and they showed up as a trail you couldn't scrub out. Hotel folios, ride-share receipts, tagged locations, and payment notes that matched her work trips a little too perfectly. Every time a new record came in, Nolan's office forwarded it, and I added it to the case file with a clean label and a date tab. Twist one hit when Kellen got nervous about the money drying up. His feed shifted first, less posting, less flexing, and then he blocked Marin for a day, which told me more than any love song ever could. A week later, Nolan called me with a different tone than usual, still calm but sharper at the edges. "I received an anonymous package," he said, "and you need to see what's in it before we decide how to use it." When I got to his office, he laid out screenshots of Marin and Kellen's messages, plus voice note transcripts that made my teeth clench. One line jumped off the page, plain and ugly. Talk about moving dead onto Reed, like I was a trash can they could kick behind the garage. I looked at Nolan and said, "Do we know who sent this?" He shook his head once. "We do not pretend we know anything until we can confirm metadata," he said. And then he pointed to dates that matched the banking activity like puzzle pieces snapping in. Twist 2 came a couple days later when Marin's younger sister Tessa texted me out of nowhere and asked to meet. She picked a coffee shop near a grocery store, neutral ground with bright windows and people coming and going. When she sat down, she didn't apologize for Marin, and she didn't play peacemaker either, but she looked tired in a way that made her seem older than she was. She slid her phone across the table and said, "I'm not here to take sides, Reed, but she's lying, and I'm done being used." Tessa showed me photos Marin had sent her like they were trophies, condo paperwork and a past due notice Marin thought was funny, complete with a caption that made it sound like the rules didn't apply to her. I kept my voice low and said, "If you're willing to swear to this, my attorney will explain what that means." Tessa nodded once and said, "I'm willing, because she keeps dragging family into her mess." Nolan met us later, explained perjury consequences in plain language, and Tessa agreed to provide a sworn statement without blinking. By the time I walked out of that coffee shop, our file wasn't just my word versus hers anymore. I tucked Tessa's printed photos into an envelope, got in my car, and drove straight to Nolan's office. Nolan took the envelope from me the second I walked into his office, like it was just another exhibit and not a grenade. He flipped through Tessa's photos without any reaction on his face, then set them beside the binder and said, "This helps because it's inside confirmation, and inside confirmation scares liars." I nodded once, because I didn't need a pep talk, and he didn't give one anyway. By the time the final hearing arrived, Marin walked in like she was hosting an event, chin up and shoulders back like the room belonged to her. Kellen trailed behind her like a shiny accessory, dressed clean and smiling too hard, trying to look like he wasn't part of the mess. Barry Klein strolled in with them, loud and confident, waving greetings like he was running a campaign. Barry opened with his big speech, turning his voice into syrup and trying to pour it over the judge. He painted Marin as the wronged wife, me as the cold money guy, and his proposed settlement as some fair resolution that somehow ended with me paying debts I didn't create. He said, "Your Honor, my client has been financially controlled for years," and he kept glancing at me like he wanted me to flinch. Marin's financial disclosure sat on the record like a clean sheet, except it forgot the online account, forgot the LLC, and forgot the condo, exactly like Nolan said it would. Judge Celeste Arden didn't look impressed. She looked patient, like she'd seen this trick 1,000 times and didn't want to waste the morning on it. She leaned forward slightly and said, "Mr. Klein, I will be asking questions, and I expect direct answers from your client." Nolan stood up calm and steady, and his voice didn't change at all when he said, "Your Honor, the disclosure is incomplete." Then he placed our binder on the table like it weighed 100 pounds, and the sound of it landing felt louder than it should have. Barry's grin twitched, and Marin's eyes narrowed like she couldn't believe anyone dared to interrupt her story. Exhibit by exhibit, we walked it without drama. Nolan laid out the inheritance withdrawal, the trace to the title company, the condo records, the LLC payments, the hidden transfers, and the timing that matched the so-called work trips. He didn't accuse. He connected dots and let the lines speak for themselves, and I watched Marin's posture stiffen as the room stopped being her stage. Judge Arden turned to Marin and asked direct questions that didn't leave room for cute answers. "Ms. Mercer, do you recognize this account?" she asked, tapping a page. Marin tried to talk around it, saying, "I don't handle all the financial details, Reed does." Then she turned and added, "He's always been obsessive about money." Judge Arden didn't blink. "That does not answer my question," she said, and Marin's next answer contradicted her own dates so fast I saw Barry's pen freeze mid-note. Barry flipped through pages like he'd just realized he wasn't driving the car anymore. When Nolan got to the debt section and showed attempts to route new obligations toward my name, Judge Arden's tone went sharp enough to cut. "This is not a minor omission," she said, and she looked straight at Marin like she was done being entertained. The ruling came clean and plain. The judge ordered the condo and related funds used to make me whole, and she reassigned the hidden debts back to Marin where they belonged. Kellen's face changed in real time, less confident and more, "I need to leave," because he finally understood the money story was over. I stood up, gathered my copy of the exhibits and slid them back into my bag while Marin stared at the table like it had betrayed her. I zipped my bag and followed Nolan out, my shoes squeaking on the polished floor. In the hallway, Marin cut across in front of me like she could still block my path, but her eyes were jumpy and her voice came out thin. "Reed, we need to talk like adults," she said, reaching for my sleeve. Nolan stayed beside me, silent, letting me handle it, and I could feel Marin hating that he didn't react to her at all. I stepped back so her hand hit air, and I kept my tone flat because I didn't want a victory lap. "There is nothing to talk out in this hallway," I said. "If your lawyer needs something, he can email Nolan, and that is the end of it." Her mouth opened like she had another speech ready, but she swallowed it when the bailiff walked by and glanced our way. Kellen didn't wait for her at all. He stood a few feet away pretending to check his phone. Then he turned and walked off fast, eyes down, shoulders tight. Like the building had started to stink and he wanted out before it touched him. Marin called his name once, sharp and embarrassed. But he kept moving and pushed through the doors without looking back. Weeks later, one mutual acquaintance from Marin's sales circle told me Kellen blamed her for promising security, and Marin blamed him for the leak like he'd robbed her. A filed statement that showed up in Discovery backed it up. All those petty accusations typed into clean paragraphs like that made them true. I didn't reach out to either of them, because watching them turn on each other was already the loudest answer I needed. Nolan handled the follow-up like he handled everything, quiet and methodical, paperwork finished to the last line. The condo went on the market within a couple months, and the proceeds restored the inheritance funds that were taken from me, dollar for dollar. The debts Marin tried to stick to me stayed with her, and that changed her public confidence fast, especially around the people she used to impress at dinners and work events. The smear attempt at my job didn't land either. HR closed my internal review clean, and Denise put the final notice in my file, which mattered when Marin tried to paint me as dishonest later. I moved into a smaller place for a while, not because I had to, but because I wanted peace more than square footage. And peace didn't come with vaulted ceilings. The biggest win wasn't the property or the numbers. It was not having to manage someone else's lies like it was my job. I still heard Grandma Evelyn's rule in my head. Money is safety, and I knew I'd done right by it. Marin promised she'd leave me with nothing, and what she really did was hand me my life back, minus her noise, as I turned my key and shut my new front door. Real quick before you head out, can I ask you something? If you've got the height feature, tap it to support this video and help it reach more people. Then please subscribe and hit like because it's huge for us and it's literally one click. When someone close to you starts twisting the truth and setting you up, do you call it out loud or stay calm and stack proof until they can't deny it? Leave a comment with "good story" or tell me what you'd do.